Good morning, Rowan. I was having a conversation with a friend about how involved it was to get into Marvel and DC comics, and, that's fair. DC has had enough continuity reboots and altering events to confuse the hell out of both readers and editorial alike. Meanwhile, Marvel has never had a true continuity reboot. They do retcon events that make it more modern to not date the work. Marvel Comics did start in the 60s, and then they grandfathered several comics dating back to pre-World War II into continuity. But I believe there are a few reasons why people don't get into Marvel and DC as opposed to something easier like My Hero Academia, which, despite its flaws, I have found to be much more enjoyable than Marvel and DC as of late. So, number one, or issue one since we're talking about comics, the price. Let's be real here, manga is a much more economic hobby. For $7, I can get 200 pages of satisfaction. Meanwhile, for less than 30 pages of satisfaction, I would need to fork over $4 on the DC end. It's not just DC. For 24 pages, I also have to fork over $4. Then you realize what kind of pages each comic is printed on. Manga, like My Hero Academia, is in black and white, and it's printed on rather inexpensive paper compared to the fully colored and glossy pages of regular comics. That's a good way to inflate production cost, a cost that gets shifted to the readers who buy these books. But if you can somehow get over this, there are more issues on hand. The second issue I see is the concept of tie interruption. Tie interruption is a concept that I coined. It's basically what we deal with for event comics. The first definition is when a comic reader needs to buy side stories and spin-offs to the main event comic to understand the main event comic itself. And two, when tie-ins to events interrupt the story of the main book. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, event comics are often a microcosm of everything wrong with Marvel and DC. So, let's say we have a traditional event, King in Black. There are two types of books. There is the main book, which is just titled King in Black, and then you have your spin-offs of that book called tie-ins. And there are a bunch of tie-in books, each of them bearing the King in Black logo to the corner. The tie-ins are there to enhance the main event of the book, but they are not necessary. If you want to see the Fantastic Four fight symbiotes during a symbiote invasion, then that battle would be shown in a tie-in rather than the main book since A, they aren't the main characters of the book, and B, the battle can be skipped over relatively quickly. It's just off to the side. It just enhances the experience. The problem I often find with the concept of tie-ins like this is that if you had your book come out once a month, then you've lost around 8% of your book's ability to tell a story for that year to a tie-in to an event that you probably don't know anything about, and then you have to wait 4 weeks to get the next one. But let's go back to our working definition of tie interruption. As I said, event comics are often a microcosm of everything wrong with Marvel and DC. Most people don't refer to definition 2, they refer to definition 1. The tie-ins themselves are needed to understand the main story. Darkseid throughout the entirety of Final Crisis is framed as the main villain. Batman breaks his no-gun rule against Darkseid. The anti-life equation, something sought out by Darkseid, is actively used by Darkseid to enslave humanity. Darkseid's spirit is ejected from the body of the man he possesses, Dan Turpin, and is flat-out destroyed by Superman. So you would be forgiven if you thought that Darkseid was the main antagonist. Nope! Then this dark monitor called Mandrak appears out of nowhere if you were reading just the main book. You had to read the tie-in called Final Crisis Superman Beyond to understand what exactly this guy's deal is. Not having any details of who exactly Mandrak is and what exactly he was planning caused a lot of problems. Mainly, what comes next looks really negated in terms of its emotional impact. Like, you had the Supermen of the multiverse, the army of God himself, and the Green Lantern Corps come out and just stake Mandrak and destroy his forces in fiery blazes. Like, how do you make the moment where the Supermen across space and time angels from heaven itself, and the Green Lantern Corps torching shadow monsters and staking a cosmic vampire feel unearned. Like, how? That should have sounded amazing. So, what's exactly the point of my tangent on this? Well, I did say event comics are a microcosm of what is wrong with Marvel and DC. The point is, other comics affect what's going on in another series, despite having a relatively tangential connection to them. It doesn't need to be an event at all. Events just bring these flaws to light when done badly. Take, for example, the retcons. Retcons in one book affect other books. The Franklin Richards is only pretending to be a mutant because he wanted to feel special retcon probably torpedoed any plans for him in the X books, especially with whatever on earth Mr. Sinister was planning with his DNA. It's not like the writers aren't aware of this problem. It's not like editorials aren't aware of this problem. Jeremy Whitley, the writer for Unstoppable Wasp and Future Foundation, had this to say about the Fantastic Four and Future Foundation spin-off that eventually got canned relatively early. The problem is that when we get confused, we're not the ones cobbling this together. So I can't imagine what on earth editorial and the writers, some of whom probably don't live in the same city at all, let alone probably same time zone, have to deal with when they have to cobble this together. Oh wait, quite humorously in the same thread, he did mention Rocket Raccoon was dying that month. I think he's alive now. Man, those statements you can only say because comics exist. But let's frame it this way. Speaking of Future Foundation and Fantastic Four, what if you wanted to get into the comic Power Pack? Let's just say Power Pack is not exactly the most well-known comic out there. If I asked you where you should start reading, where do you start reading? And where are they now? Well, to get a full picture-ish of that, you'd have to start with Power Pack Volume 1, then you have to have a glancing, at least Wikipedia summary knowledge of Fantastic Four, Cloak and Dagger, and New Mutants, because those do have crossovers in that book. Then you have to deal with the Holiday Special, then you have to deal with Volume 2, then you have to deal with Runaways because you need the context for the Loners, which features Julie Power. Then you have Avengers Academy. Then you have to deal with her brother, Alex, for Fantastic Four. Then you have FF, which is not to be confused with Fantastic Four. Then you have the Power Pack Legacy issue. Then you have Runaways again. Then you have Future Foundation proper. And then you have Outlawed. And I am sure I am missing some books in there because I am sure these kids have interacted with more of the Marvel Universe. And this is just Earth 616 continuity alone, and I think they're a relatively new team in terms of comics, only coming around in the 80s. And they're only 4 characters. And they're all related. Yeah. That can get convoluted real fast. Which leads me into my next point, Issue 3, The Endlessness. Again, Whitley chimes in on this, and I wouldn't say it's about one big story. I think it's like history where it's multiple interlocking narratives into one big tapestry. And the worst part about it is that nobody lets anything end. Everything always has to come back from the dead years later to tell stories that make the original less impactful. And this is a fair assessment of the matter. Most of us learn about Freytag's pyramid, about exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Many of us have also known about the expanded form dedicated to heroes called the hero's journey. For comics, it only exists on an arc-by-arc basis or a run-by-run basis at the least. The point of a story is to evoke some kind of emotion out of a reader, but feeling angry, disappointed, or apathetic as comics trail off into the void, that's just not good for us. Most of the time, it's anger at bad creative decisions or creative decisions dedicated to authors wanting to leave their mark on iconic characters no matter the cost. Take, for example, the case of Cassandra Cain. She was Batgirl. She turned evil because of bad creative decisions, and they used a retcon to, well, say she was drugged. Scarlet Witch? She went mad with grief, wiped out all of mutant kind, and then was absolved of it because House of M was a disaster and Wanda was actually really innocent because of Doctor Doom reasons. The old adage of no one stays dead except Bucky, Jason Todd, and Uncle Ben. You're two out of three for coming back to the dead. I honestly don't blame people who say this. What is the point of getting attached to these characters when you know future writers will sour them with needless and complicated retcons, petty creator feuds, or banish them to the depths of comic book limbo? And that's fair. I do know people who detest Spider-Man One More Day to the point they refuse to buy any Spider-Man comics with Peter Parker in it, because the deal with Mephisto soured the character enough in their eyes, and what happened there was such a needlessly convoluted and complicated retcon that they are just too confused and too angry to just want to understand it. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is also a shared universe. Will continuity be its tomb, or will it come up with a solution that prevents it from being so? I don't know. So, goodbye, Rowan. I'll see you later.